I predict that every cell phone tower on Earth will become obsolete within 10 years because of direct-to-device. Every cell phone company that is invested in towers is looking at a dead asset with trailing revenues, and they have to figure out what to do with it.
Hey, Space Watchers, and welcome back to another episode of Space Café Radio. Today, live from the hidden lake here in vicinity of the wonderful Colorado mountains. So we are near Denver, and I have the great pleasure to sit on the terrace of Daniel Faber. Daniel is one of the people I really admire in the industry, and I'm not saying that too often, but we know each other for almost a decade now.
At least a decade.
It is a decade, yeah. I know that I'm old. I know that will come out. And he always started something people didn't want to believe. And I think we just got him at a point where that might happen again. Daniel, welcome to Space Café Radio.
Thank you. Welcome to my deck and to the view and the sunshine.
Absolutely. So, how are you doing?
Doing very well, thanks.
You made news a few weeks back on LinkedIn in stepping down from your position as CEO of Orbit Fab. Can you give us a bit of the context on the background before we dig into a few things that happen in the industry and what makes the industry up?
Yeah, absolutely. I started Orbit Fab with a couple of co-founders about 8 years ago. It's been a fun journey. When we started it, I think, as you said, not a lot of people believed in what we were doing, which was making satellites refuelable. And so we had to create that paradigm shift. We also had to create the technology that would allow that to happen. And we built a team, had to build a company, and all the usual things of a startup. So that was a hell of a journey. All the ups, all the downs, really excited to be able to sit here now and say that the paradigm has shifted and the technology exists and works. That's been really cool. I've been discussing with our investors for a while, where is this going? What does the company look like? Who do we need on the team for the next chapter as we were closing a significant round of investment? And there's a lot of things that I want to do. I have to be honest with myself and ask, am I that person? Am I going to be the happiest? Am I going to have the biggest impact on the world? Taking it from where it is now to the billion-dollar company, the IPO, it's an impressive step. It's not a stage of a company that I've led before. And so am I the right person? Is it the right opportunity for me? All those types of things. And I got the investors' perspective on that. I got my team's perspective on that. I talked to a lot of my advisors. And at the end of the day, made a decision that there's more that I can do if I'm not trying to take that step with Orbit Fab next. I think there are better people for that, and there's a lot that I can do in the industry. I'd already been working on a number of ideas.
I try my best to hear about them later on, but I'm quite sure that there will limits what I will hear. The first time we met, you run around Deep Space Industries, or another company that started together and with Planetary Resources in a field no one believed in, no one could imagine at that point of time. I don't say that it changed now, but it's a forefront of innovation. Let's put it that way, going the way no one walked before. And then with Orbital Fab, I see a pattern in going into an uncharted territory, which can be super cool because there's no one there you have to share the market with. But the reality is that you have to create a market for that. That's a long journey, usually, isn't it?
Absolutely agree. And to add more context to it, when I was an undergrad more than 25 years ago now, I was thinking, what do I want to do with my life? I want to do something interesting. I want to do something that's really impactful for the world, for humanity. And after thinking a lot, I came to realize that addressing existential risks was important. If you integrate to infinity the benefit, then perhaps they're the only important things worth working on. And so I decided we should get humans and life off Earth. This is the most significant thing since we crawled out of the ocean.
Yeah.
And so why would I work on anything else? But I also was in Australia at the time, and there was no space agency. There was a lot of political support for never having a space agency. There were no companies there that were making a significant difference. So I realized I'd have to do something myself, most likely. I also thought that we need a profit incentive if we're going to get people and life off Earth. Capitalism seems to be very efficient at moving resources onto new projects, new endeavors, if you can find that. So I wrote down a list of industries I thought could pay for the first permanent jobs in space. And that list was fairly short. At the time, it was tourism, asteroid mining, and space-based solar power. And because in the late 90s I could do math, I crossed out space-based solar power after about a month. Thankfully, things have changed. Different people have different ideas now. But I decided I'd look at asteroid mining. And so my career has been working on things that will advance us towards asteroid mining. So designed a bunch of satellites and then started setting up companies. The first one was actually instrumentation for the mining industry. The second one was high-speed internet for Antarctica, in part because I believed that we needed very small radios to work for commercial deep space missions. And then at Deep Space Industries, asteroid mining was what was written on the shingle. That was the goal of the company. But I took over that company after about 18 months when really the first business model could be called bag a billionaire, and the company hadn't bagged a billionaire. So I came in and said, look, asteroid mining is great, and I want to do that as much as anyone else in this company. But we need to build things people are going to buy. And so we built the thrusters to move satellites around in orbit. And we made these thrusters that could run off material that you could get out of an asteroid. Because when you look at the economics of it, when you look at the geology and everything else, the first thing that's really going to be useful to sell from asteroids or the moon is going to be fuel. But none of the thrusters actually use the fuels that you could make out of an asteroid or the moon. And so we built those thrusters. And we positioned them at a certain size class and power class and everything in the market that everybody really wanted at the time. So they ended up getting picked up on Capella, Umbra, Black Sky, Hawkeye 360, leveraged that to be the prime contractor for the Hawkeye 360 mission. So that did pretty well as a product positioning on a strategy that was still focused eventually at asteroid mining. So coming out of that, Orbit Fab all of a sudden probably makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's just creating the market for that fuel in orbit. So now the market for the fuel exists, and other companies have picked up those thrusters, including Bradford Space that purchased to Deep Space Industries. And so now I'm thinking, is asteroids mining still the most likely thing to create permanent jobs in space, or a very important part of the path towards that? How do I move that forward the next step? Or are there parallel things that are going to get us to that place quicker? And so these are some of the things. I'm going to stay coy because the stealth space company that I'm now working on, we're not public. But it gives you an idea of the way that I think about these things.
Hearing you, I would like to listen to your thoughts of where is the space industry at the moment from your point of view? Because we have seen this iteration over the last decades from purely institutional, then everything will be solved by commercial. That didn't work out that well. And now it is the big time frame of the defense and security spendings in space, which we haven't seen before to that extent, especially when we look to a world outside the US. So if you put that together, where does the space industry stand at the moment? Or in more simpler terms, how healthy is a patient?
It all depends on your perspective, right? The space industry is now, 70, 80 years since we had 0 satellites. And then there was 1. And now there seems to be an acceleration. For a long time, it was tens or dozens of satellites a year. All of a sudden, we've got thousands of satellites being launched every year. There are rockets going up every single day of the year, which is quite a paradigm shift from even a few years ago. However, I think that a good comparison is to ask, how's that industrial revolution going now that we've invented a steam engine? I don't think we've even got to the steam train. We've started putting steam engines in which allow us to do mills and more efficient mining and a few things. In the space industry, we have telecoms, we have remote sensing, there's R&D programs that are national security. There's a lot of national security stuff. But also the national security stuff is mostly around gathering information or communicating information. 150, 200 years ago, somebody invented the first industrial vacuum pump, and it let us remove air from a jar on an industrial scale. Now you have a lot of jars with no air in it. What do you do? It seems pointless when you just say it that way, but we use vacuum pumps for everything. You can't imagine building a factory without a vacuum pump right now. We use variable pressure because of how it changes how chemical reactions happen. It also changes thermodynamics. We have refrigeration because of vacuum pumps. Everything changed over the following 50 years. We are on the cusp of getting industrial access to zero gravity. We can take gravity out of the jar. Now you have a jar with no gravity. What do you do with that? It sounds silly on the surface of it. But gravity is the force that organizes matter at a macroscopic level. All of the chemical processes, all of the physical processes, the number of things that are going to be possible because we can remove gravity, we have not even scratched. Nobody knows what we can do. And yet already there's a list as long as my arm of all the things people want to try. That's pretty exciting. So how are we doing? We're almost getting started. That's how we're doing.
You looked a bit forward to what can come now. Where do we stand? But did space arrive in people's mind outside the space industry? Or is it we're recording that here a few hours before Artemis 2 is returning from space after over 50 years, our first time that humans flying around the moon coming back. It's a big media play, but the question is what will remain from that? I think we both are too young to have experienced a human on the moon. I've been there already, but literally too young to recognize what happened. And how big is this impact of this mission? And when you compare here in the US or in Europe, what would you say?
Yeah, you asked where is space in the psyche, right? How is it in the public's minds right now? Part of my answer is it doesn't matter. I used the analogy of vacuum pumps in manufacturing before. Does the general public even know what a vacuum pump is? Maybe they've heard the term, but it's a multi-billion-dollar business, and it's a multi-trillion-dollar business has been enabled from that kind of technology. So in one respect, it doesn't need the general public for it to be successful. And I use successful in air quotes. It depends how you define success. If you think that it's all about the national government budgets, NASA and ESA, then you're in the realm of politics, because it's politicians that fund those organizations for purposes of research and development and economic growth and technology development, etc. But they're political decisions. And for those, you need public support. And for that, it's important. And so I'd expect to see programs like Artemis, which have some, but not enormous scientific value. They have definite engineering value, but they have mostly marketing value. They have political value, and that matters. No Buck Rogers, no bucks. But from an industrialization perspective of space, I think other things matter. The economic incentives are what really interest me.
Then let's talk policy here. I see your point, and public opinion matters when we talk about the government funds, because public opinion drives politicians' opinion sometimes, or political decisions sometimes. Depends on the level of democracy you're in at the moment. But do you think that the entire space sector can be independent from government funding? We relied on that for the last 50 years, let's face it. And even now we see, as I mentioned before, defense and security is coming to a new high. It's also taxpayers' money at the end of the day. And I think that, in my opinion, the new space revolution, our commercialization, didn't work out as planned. We have seen the period of the specs coming in as a vehicle, which at the end didn't work out as planned. So is there a pure commercial market in the space sector? And again, pre-steam engine here.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's definitely a saying I've heard in the industry. Every dollar in the space industry is one, almost maximum 2 steps away from being a government dollar. And there's a lot to be said for that. The budgets for the in-space hardware are definitely more substantial on the government side, maybe an order of magnitude more than what's being spent for commercial systems. The downstream tends to be the other way around. Once you've got a service in place, the GPS receivers and everything that's built in GPS is way bigger than the cost of the GPS satellites or the value of the GPS satellite contract to those people that make it.
So that's then a government-enabled market.
Correct. In the similar way, telecoms, it's the downstream services that are adding the most value. The money spent actually building the comsats is trivial compared to the amount of money made by the telco operators, the cell phone providers who rely on the backhaul through the satellite and all of the other things. So the upstream segment of the market is always a lot smaller, whether the upstream is government or commercial. But the government upstream is 10 times bigger than the commercial upstream.
I can't leave that without comments as an ex-geo guy or with SAS. I mean, looking at the numbers or the geo operators, they've seen better days than today. I worked with SAS when there was an EBIT of over 90% or so, something like that, really golden years for the sector. But it was also a time prior digitization where you bought a transponder per channel. So in SAS case, are 12 million Deutschmarks are per channel per year. So that changed with the digitization? Absolutely. And with the decline of the entire broadcast market, it also helped into that. So the question is, and on the other hand, how many geos, big geos, telecom geos have we seen launched in the last years?
Irrelevant.
I remember a conversation with Swiss Re, I think end of 2017, where they said, hey, this year was the last year that there was a relevant number of telco satellites we launched. That also has an impact also on the insurance business, and of course. But again, is that in a market that is self-sustaining? Or is that also not the right question? Because LEO Telecom is not.
If I ask you to list the top 10 or 20 most valuable companies in the world, how far do you go before you come to SpaceX? Like, SpaceX is a telecommunications company with a rocket problem. They're a $1.7 billion telecommunications company with a $50 billion rocket company tacked on the side. That is satellite telco. It is the future of telecommunications. I predict that every cell phone tower on Earth will become obsolete within 10 years because of direct-to-device. Every cell phone company that is invested in towers is looking at a dead asset with trailing revenues, and they have to figure out what to do with it. That is why AST SpaceMobile is worth $36 billion with $10 million of revenue. That is why SpaceX is worth $1.75 trillion. That is why we've seen, just in the last 6 to 9 months, a half a dozen other mega constellation companies rising and getting funded. I am very bullish on where space-based communications is going, and yet I also think it's only the first of what is inevitably going to be dozens of other massive markets that we discover in the next 10 and 20 years in space.
Maybe my engineering imagination bold enough to see something. Maybe you can help me to see that. So what do we have in mind? So which direction are you thinking?
For telecommunications?
For instance, yeah. The D2D market, I'm not that optimistic as you. I see there is a market, there is a niche, no doubt. There's a demand for this kind of service, and that's great. But then you have landing rights, then you have spectrum, and so on and so forth. So there are a few regulatory and, of course, physical problems to solve before. Is it possible? Maybe yes. But what we see at the moment are, as well with SpaceX, just to name it, is when the defense of a country depends on a single person to take a decision. Are they worth to be defended today or not? Because then the sovereignty issue kicks in as well. And that's what we see at the moment as we speak, rising more and more. Is there a need for 100 mega constellations in space? No, it doesn't make sense. And space traffic management will not be made easier with all of that. But the drive is national sovereignty, national defense at the end of the day. So I'm not sure if I'm buying fully into the D2 or D2D model on that.
So the regulatory side is always going to be with us. Every industry is regulated.
Yes.
The structural implications, national security risks or economic risks or what have you, those are interesting. There are always ways around those. And perhaps there's lessons that have to be learned the hard way, and we'll change the structures or not. But the solution architecture is on a path to providing lower capex or higher reliability or lower unit cost or insert the economic advantage you're looking for, an operational advantage. That's what we're getting with these constellations. So there's 3 different models I'll call out here. So everyone's familiar now with Starlink, right? SpaceX owns those satellites. It's partnered with a few telcos for a spectrum and for customer base. I predict, in typical SpaceX and Elon Musk fashion, they'll learn everything they need to about that market, and then they'll find a way to become the telco, and they'll eat the market themselves. That's one approach. AST SpaceMobile has a second approach. They're putting up the large phased array antennas, direct-to-device from the get-go, with the software-defined radios and everything else on board. And so they will own your transponder and everything else. And the telcos are signed up, and they're signed up most of the telcos in the world. In fact, almost every telco that's not signed up with SpaceX is already signed up with AST. And thus, that's leading their market cap. But they seem to be a bit more of a friendly play in that the spectrum belongs to the operators. The customers belong to the operators. But the transponder is the proprietary tech of AST. And then there's a third play. I need to dig into this deeper and to understand fully how they're going to execute it, which is Space 42. And it appears that in that model, the telco gets to own the transponder. And so now the telco owns the customer, the spectrum, and the transponder, and Space 42 owns the platform. That's a subtly different model. So now you've got 3 different structures. The structure that has the most economic advantage, the least structural risk from whichever perspective, is likely going to be the one that wins long term, and maybe a few of them will coexist. But I think that those provide paths around some of the main issues that you're concerned about.
What is the next big thing on your end? Now, having a lot of free time to think, to reflect, and to make new plans. And you're too young to retire, and you're too full of energy. But I have to say, when we met the first time and I learned about our Orbit Fab, I wasn't, like many others, not convinced as well. Hesitating to buy into your views doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong. So maybe I will learn it, as you say, it's a hard way that Daniel is right again. But what's the next big thing for you?
I always tell entrepreneurs that I advise that in order to be successful, they need to be contrarian.
Yeah.
Because if they're doing something everybody already believes, it's a commodity.
Yeah.
They're competing with everybody else. There's no margins. Why bother? You need to be contrarian. However, you also need to be right. And it's very easy to be contrarian and wrong. Being contrarian and right matters. So every time that I tell them that they're wrong, they can tick the box that they're contrarian.
Okay.
I don't have to believe they're right. They just have to be right. And that's their job. And so I'm not afraid of putting out things that most people don't believe. I fully understand that my job is to prove them wrong and to change the paradigm and to reach the day at which it does become consensus, when I've already got a bit of market share and mind share and have created something interesting. Of course, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that will accelerate a sufficiently thriving in-space economy where goods and services are created in space to be sold and used in space. A sufficiently thriving in-space economy that can support permanent jobs in space. That, I think, is what is necessary for us to settle the solar system and take humans and life off Earth permanently. And so there are a number of angles on that. There are definitely a lot of things in the path towards asteroid mining that are still interesting to me. But we've talked about a couple of things. I mentioned manufacturing. We've talked about telecoms and how I think that is expanding. And it's global telecoms is a $2 to $3 trillion market. Power generation is a $6 to $7 trillion market. And with more and more data centers being built, that market is expanding. Yeah, manufacturing is a $10 to $15 trillion market. How much of that will end up in space? These things are interesting. I'm not going to say right now what I'm doing, but I am already meeting with my likely co-founders. We are already starting to put in place some of the pieces of the company that we're putting together. Watch this space.
To be continued. Daniel, thank you very much for your time and for your insight and for this very interesting and thought-provoking exchange. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Torsten, and thanks for coming and visiting my house next to the lake.
Oh, it was great pleasure. And with that, SpaceWatch out. If you like these or other episodes of Space Café Radio, leave us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. It is the currency of today. And if you want to stay on the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global and subscribe to our newsletters. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Torsten Kriening, publisher at SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space.